Russia is a country made up of over 200 different ethnic groups. Most of these different ethnic groups have gotten along quite well over the last 32 years. And I say mostly because there were only two ethnic groups that had a war against each other, those being the Ossetians and the Ingush. So let us dive deep to understand the only ethnic war within modern Russia. Before going into the history, let's understand the two ethnic groups. In the west are the Ossetians. The Ossetians are an Iranian ethnic and linguistic group, and they are majority Orthodox. To the east of them are the Ingush. The Ingush are an ethnic group native to the Caucasus. They speak a Nah language and they are majority Muslim. These two groups never had any major problems until 1918, so let us start there. In 1918, during the Russian Civil War, the Ingush fought with the Bolsheviks. The Ingush would attack the local White Army Cossacks and turn for the Prigorodny region, which had a small Ossetian minority. By 1920, the Cossacks were defeated, and so the Prigorodny region was given to the Ingush. After the Civil War in 1924, the Soviets broke up the Northern Caucasus into 5 autonomous regions, which today we're only going to be focusing on 3 of them. Those are the North Ossetian, Ingushetian, and Chechen Autonomous Oblasts. Interestingly, the Ossetians and the Ingush shared the same capital city, Vladikavkaz, and so for the next 10 years not much would happen until 1934. In 1934, the leader of the Soviet Union and border destroyer Joseph Stalin forced the Ingush and Chechens to combine into one singular autonomous region. Now, this was because the Chechens and the Ingush came from the same ethnic and linguistic group, and so no other problems would happen for the next 6 years. Starting in 1940, an insurgency against the Soviets started in Chechnya. It went on for 4 years. While that was going on in Ingushetia and Ossetia, the German and Soviet armies fought intensely. By the beginning of 1943, the Germans retreated out of the region, and so the Soviet authorities now focused their eyes on the Ingush and the Chechens. The entire region was accused of collaborating with the Germans, and there really was not much evidence of this. But the Soviets did not care, and so they planned a mass deportation. Starting the next year on February 23, 1944, over 500,000 Chechens and Ingush were deported to Central Asia. 25% of them, over 100,000 people, would die due to the elements. On top of that, Stalin completely erased the Ingush-Chechen Autonomous Region, redrawing the border so its territory would be split up. Most importantly for this story, he would give the Prigorodny region to North Ossetia. After this, 41,000 Ossetians would move into the region, as well as 30,000 of other ethnicities. For reference, the Ingush population of the region before the deportation was a little over 28,000 people. In 1956, the leader of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, passed numerous reforms to undo the actions of Stalin. One of these was re-establishing the Ingush-Chechen Autonomous region and allowing the people to return home. However, the Prigorodny region was not given back, and so the Ingush who did return to this region found their homes lived in and their businesses sold off. And so following this, the Ingush in the region struggled with extreme discrimination by the Ossetians. Just for some examples, they were forced to pay bribes just to live in their old homes. Often these homes were not even lived in before, they just wanted them to pay, and were arrested for speaking against the Ossetians. And as a result, this is where the conflict started. And now we skip 15 years to April 1972, when a group of 27 Ingush leaders wrote a 75-page plea to the Soviet government asking to re-give the region. Part of the first page described the Ingush point of view. It read, "The situation is an open genocide, hostile and incompatible with Soviet policy. It is a disgrace to it." And of course, they were denied again by the Soviets. So 8 months later, in November 1972, the main organizer of the movement, former Army Commander Mikhail Kotov, got 5,000 signatures for another plea. This one only asked the Soviet government to force the Ossetians into giving equal rights to the Ingush. As soon as they arrived in Moscow to give the plea, they were arrested. Once again, they had a meeting with the Soviet officials who said, once again, they had zero intention to do anything. After that, they were told to stop protesting and were released back home. But the Ingush did not give up, so they, with the support of the Chechens, organized a mass rally in the Autonomous Republic's capital, Grozny. Over 15,000 Ingush arrived, and the rally officially started on January 16, 1973. The rally lasted for 3 days, and it featured over 100 Ingush speakers, all asking for the region to be returned, or at least to have equal rights within it. And this time, the Soviet government did respond, but not in the way the Ingush expected, as the Soviets sent a police force. On January 19th, martial law was declared in Grozny, and so the rally was forcibly broken up by the Soviet police. The Ingush went home, and the Soviet authorities arrested many of the organizers. However, the Soviets did force the Ossetians to allow Ingush schools, so tensions slightly eased. For the next 8 years, not much would happen other than continuous threats of Ingush deportation, and in turn, threats of violence to the Ossetians. These would go on until October 21st, 1981, when an Ossetian taxi driver was murdered. Who killed the driver was unknown, but immediately tensions boiled, and so the military commander of Ossetia put the military on guard and waited for the funeral. The funeral started 3 days later in Vladikavkaz, and soon after, violence between both groups started in the city. The two groups fought in the streets with stones, metal bars, and Molotovs. Martial law was once again declared, and the Soviet police broke it up. At the end of it, 1 person was killed and over 300 were badly injured. As a result of this violence, the leader of Ossetia was replaced with a Russian, and a permanent Soviet police force would be put into the region. This kept peace for now, though there would be minor acts of violence between both sides for the next 8 years. As I have mentioned before on this channel, starting in 1985, the leader of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev, passed numerous reforms to allow free speech and allow local political parties. One of these local political parties was called Nisha, founded in May 1988 by a strike leader named Iza Kudzoev. Nisha, which means justice in English, had 2 main goals. 1, to return the separate Ingushetian Republic, and 2, to return the Prigorodny region to Ingushetia. The first step to achieving this goal came in September 1989, when 60,000 Ingush signed a paper saying that Ingushetia should be a separate republic. This would be rejected, but this was important to what would come later. 1991 is the year the conflict resumed and started its violent phase. So let us start by understanding the population of this contentious region. Very important note, I'm going to be taking the population of the Prigorodny region and half of the city of Vladikavkaz, since remember the right half was originally Ingush. With that out of the way, the population of the entire region was a little over 205,000 people. 52% of the region was Ossetian, 30% was Russian, 13% was Ingush, and the last 3% were others. Now I want to apologize because these are very rough numbers, but this is the closest estimate I can really make. To start, in January 1991, South Ossetia, an Ossetian separatist region within Georgia, declared independence. In turn, it was invaded by the Georgian army, starting a war. Over 40,000 Ossetians fled to North Ossetia, and this would destabilize the region even more as they had a different culture and brought weapons. 2 months later, in early March, a mass rally for an Ingush republic began. A future Russian president, Boris Yeltsin, went to the rally. He would speak at the rally on March 24th, voicing his support for the recreation of the Ingushetian Republic. A month after this, on April 19th, a brief firefight between Ingush and Ossetian police officers occurred in a village outside Vladikavkaz, resulting in 1 dead and several injured. Following this, a state of emergency was declared and Russian internal troops were sent to keep order. A week later, on April 26, 1991, the Soviet government wrote a law saying all ethnicities deported by Stalin had the right to reclaim their lost territory, and that the Soviet government would recognize it. And honestly, this was a massively stupid law, as the Soviet government had no idea how this could end peacefully. So they quickly wrote into the law that people who currently live in stolen territory should have their rights respected. And in turn, this made the law basically useless, and so the law became just a way to apologize for the acts of Stalin. As a result of this massively dumb move, less than 2 days later, a firefight occurred between the two groups, resulting in 8 dead and over 24 wounded. Russian internal troops soon stepped in and stopped any more violence for now. Not much would happen until November 30th, 1991, when the Chechens fully separated as Chechnya. The Russians did not recognize this, but luckily for Russia, the Ingush were not interested in being in Chechnya, as they wanted their own republic within Russia. During their declaration of independence from Chechnya, the Ingush leadership claimed the capital was going to be Vladikavkaz, and the Prigorodny region would be returned. Before going on, here's a little side note. There's a theory saying that Boris Yeltsin only supported the Ingush up to this point because he didn't want them to join the Chechens, though I don't know how true this really is. Anyways, on December 25th, 1991, the Soviet Union officially was dead, and now the region was under the Russian Federation. And so with that, not much would happen until June 1992. In June 1992, the conflict boiled again, as on June 4th, Ingushetia was officially declared as a republic within Russia, though its borders were not defined. And at the same time as this, Ossetia formed a paramilitary which actually had armored vehicles and produced their own weapons. The Ingush responded by forming militias and got weapons from underground markets in Chechnya. The Russian troops in the region saw the arming of both sides, and so the commanders in Moscow decided to declare a state of emergency for the region on June 12th. Nearly 2 weeks later, on June 24th, the war in South Ossetia ended with a ceasefire. As a result, many of South Ossetia's fighters went to North Ossetia, and so did a large amount of weapons, including dozens of armored vehicles. During this, in Prigorodny, hundreds of ethnic-related crimes occurred, including 47 murders. Still during all of this, the Russian government refused to officially designate Ingushetia's borders, and as a result, tensions would continue to boil. By October 1992, both sides were armed and ready for a conflict. All it needed was a spark. On October 20th, 1992, a 13-year-old Ingush girl was run over by an Ossetian armored vehicle. It is unknown if this was intentional or by an accident, but following this, a brief gunfight occurred, killing 2 Ossetian officers. 2 days later, an even greater firefight occurred, killing 3 Ingush police officers. As a result of this, on October 24th in Nazaran, the now capital of Ingushetia, a declaration was made. This declaration was for all Ingush villages within Prigorodny to barricade and to resist any Ossetian police or paramilitary force. With this declaration was the president of Ingushetia officially annexing the Prigorodny region, claiming the original 1924 borders. They then declared that the Ossetians have been committing genocide against the Ingush. The Ossetian government responded by saying that they did not recognize the annexation and they will send paramilitaries into Ingush villages by force. For the next 6 days, there was a face-off in the region. Hundreds of Ingush militia members crossed the border into Prigorodny. As a result, the Ossetians mobilized the People's Militia. 2 more Ingush and 1 more Ossetian were killed during this face-off, and the Russians tried to make another commission and ask for an end to hostilities, but it was too far gone. At midnight on October 30th, 1992, the Ossetians used artillery to shell 4 Ingush villages, and that is where the war began. When daylight came, an Ingush militia raided the city of Chernarussian and entered the military camp there. They held 110 Ossetian troops hostage, they took the weapons and equipment and advanced south to Vladikavkaz. The militia group was stopped by an Ossetian paramilitary, and so both sides dug in. Outside of Vladikavkaz, the Ossetian and Ingush militias fought across the region. The Russian military, not wanting the conflict to grow any larger, decided to intervene, sending an entire brigade to the region. But who would they support? Well, on the night of October 31st, Russian General Gennady Vilatov would make a statement. Russia has not forgotten its faithful sons, the Ossetians. Today, Ossetian soldiers with departments of the Russian interior troops will begin military actions against the aggressor. For the next 4 days, the Ossetian and Russian armies directly fought the Ingush with armored vehicles and artillery. The Ingush militia, only equipped with AKs and a handful of armored vehicles, were pushed back. Eventually, by the morning of November 5th, all Ingush resistance in Prigorodny was crushed, ending the war. And the cost of the war came into view. Just in 1 week, 151 Ossetians were killed and over 300 Ingush were killed. Outside of that, 11 Russian troops were killed and 25 others would be dead. Most importantly, at least 100 civilians were killed, as shelling of villages occurred and hostage taking was done by both sides. Many of the hostages taken throughout the war were killed in horrific ways, such as being burnt alive. Mass graves were found across the region, and there are possibly that some remain unfound to this day. The Russian army directly controlled the region and also further occupied Ingushetia. This, however, would not be the end of the violence, as just in the next month, another 27 would be killed, and over the next 2 years, another 176 people would be killed in murders and in brief firefights. The region, although not in war, was very dangerous. Crime was extremely rampant, and assassinations of officials were very common. Nearly 46,000 Ingush left the entire region, and only starting a decade later, half of them returned. For negotiations, they started 6 months after the war, and after another 6 months of debate, both sides agreed to a joint commission on October 25th, 1993. This was reportedly biased to the Ossetian side, but it kept the peace. The impacts of this conflict were felt across the region, but most importantly in Chechnya, where the Chechen leaders were already at odds with the Russians. Now they saw no hope to reconcile things with Russia, and eventually this led to the infamous Chechen Wars. Since 1994, the situation is still shaky. Ingushetia became a battleground during the Chechen Wars, and later became the hub of radical Islamic terrorists. On September 1st, 2004, in the Ossetian city of Beslan, 32 Islamic terrorists commanded by an Ingush Chechen leader named Shamir Basiev went to a secondary school and held its over 1,100 students and adults hostage. The Russian army attempted to siege the school, resulting in the terrorists shooting and bombing numerous hostages. 333 of the hostages were killed, and all of the terrorists except 1 were dead. When it was revealed that Shamir Basiev was behind this, and 9 of the terrorists were Ingush, riots started in Ossetia. But this was actually intentionally done by the terrorists, as they intended to start a religious and ethnic war, and so the Russian military quickly put an end to the riots. Officially in 2005, the border of Ingushetia was solidified with no protests, and since then, the 2 republics have signed numerous treaties and agreements to keep peace, all under the supervision of the Russian government. Ossetia has remained relatively fine since 2005. However, Ingushetia, as I have mentioned before, has struggled with terrorism and is the poorest republic in Russia, but both republics today are mostly stable. The question asked now is if this conflict will ever return, and my answer to that is I think the way things are going right now, the answer is a no. But it is a very volatile situation, and if the Russians completely abandon the region, things most likely would return to fighting. Hopefully this doesn't happen, but we will have to see. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, and bell. Comment on what you would want next, and have a good day. Goodbye.